This video is the most stupid and long thing I've ever done, and I don't know what my point with it was, or what I was trying to do. Oh, I fucked it up. So much dumb stuff has happened in my life since I last uploaded, and through all that, this video's been sat there with me thinking, damn, I don't want to deal with that right now. It's become such a mound of scripting and files and stuff, and I don't know where I was going with it. I don't know what I was doing. I've got a kind of vague idea here of what I was trying to do, but I'm not even sure if it's relevant anymore. The original thing that made me think this mess would be a good idea was Days Gone. See, a while back there was a bunch of discussion about a Days Gone 2. The Days Gone sold well, but they didn't want to make a sequel based on it not being received well critically. Even though saying that feels kind of silly. It has a 71 on Metacritic, but also right next to that is a big 8.3. People like the game, but not enough apparently, and now the world of Days Gone is going to be left, probably forever. This isn't isolated either, it seems to be a general approach to Sony titles. It needs to be perfect or it's out, and while this is probably better than saying it needs to sell every copy or it's out, it's still not an amazing way to decide this stuff, but it might sound like it is. You hear they're gonna focus on making sequels to their most successful titles, and it's like, yeah, of course they are, but it's a bit more complicated than that, so I thought I'd look at some of Sony's recent titles that haven't sprung off into big franchises. You get it? It's kind of a short intro, but I want to get on with things. I'm sick of this video and I want to make one about the Matrix games instead, so yay. Quick note, these are being played on a PS5. I'm bringing this up to brag and that's about it. Nah, I'm just mentioning it as like a technical thing because I think loading times are better and some stuff runs at a better frame rate. Not stuff I usually mention in these videos, but just in case the PS4 version turns out to be way worse or something, but I doubt that. The only time I really thought about it was with loading and frame rates, and when New Order asked me to buy it again. Like, thanks, yeah, I'm seeing this ad because I already bought the game, but sure, I'll take the disc that cost me £5 out and spend like 7 times that to play the same thing. Why not? Good idea. Why is this here? We'll start with The Order, because it's the first one I played. That's a good enough reason as any, I don't know. By the way, watch this. Yeah, this isn't actually as bad when you're playing the game on like a big TV and everything, but there's huge black bars for everything. I didn't cause this, the game's just like that and you can't turn it off, so I was gonna mention that I remembered like other games doing this for some reason around the same time, because I remember Evil Within did it as well, and I looked up to see what other games did it. I can't find anything. I just find like people reporting issues in games with black bars. I don't know why this was a thing. Fuck, wait, actually, I'm going way off topic here, sorry. But I'm never going to get to talk about the black bars thing that games did again. So in Evil Within, they've patched it out now, you can turn it off, but originally you couldn't turn it off, and there was a boss that would crawl on the ceilings and floors, and you couldn't see it because of the black bars. That was just necessary. The game had to be broken because of these black bars. They were part of the experience, I guess. The Order 1886 is a third-person shooter about fighting werewolves. Kind of. It's not really. It's more about being this guy called Galahad, who is a part of an order of royal knights, who I realised like halfway through the game are supposed to be like King Arthur's knights. I noticed that the trailers and pre-release stuff for the game is very quick and flashy. A second of shooting, then a punchy animation, and then more quick shooting. All the comments just mention the graphics, and the articles about the E3 demo mostly also comment on the graphics, along with the fact that the demo was kind of short. There weren't even many trailers or anything to look at, and looking at the developer, Ready at Dawn's previous work, it's just PSP titles and the Wii port of Okami. It wasn't really pushed or hyped up at all, it just seems thrown out there, selling itself on the setting and the power of the PS4. It is a cool setting though, and uses that power of PS4. It takes place in alternate history London, and at least covers the look and atmosphere really well. The city has lots of claustrophobic alleyways with little hidden away shops and doors. There's a bit where you go to a poorer area and it's very busy with people dashing about, working or getting into... It all feels very lively, while other areas like the closed subways don't have this liveliness because they shouldn't. They're quiet and empty and have a kind of eerie loneliness to them because of this contrast. Consistently though, it all feels appropriate for the setting. The upper class areas have that weird half pavement, half road thing. The subway is filled with these round, tiley tunnels and those really sad paintings you get in these fancy places. It all feels really complete, with even tiny spaces like these cabins being really detailed. Part of this is because of the degree of fidelity the game has, and that is commendable. This is amazing looking technically with all its hyper-realistic and detailed models and textures. You could release this now and it would still be complimented for this, but I feel like everything is pulling it along. Lighting is perfect, it always has a source, and that source sets the mood for the whole area. Light comes in through windows and gives these quiet hallways a kind of cold, empty feeling. Lights in tunnels are single light bulbs hanging down, giving a kind of dim but warm ambience. It can feel almost like horror-y at times for its darker atmosphere. There are a couple moments where you're lighting the area using a lantern and have to shoot enemies in the dark, which is great. Or the moments with werewolves slipping out of darkness. But there's also a specific werewolf fight in a hospital, and I think it benefits from not using the same darkness of these other sections. The light only coming from windows, which show the foggy outdoors, gives it a kind of stillness and natural feeling, which is fun and fairly unique. Sound design emphasises all this too. That hallway I mentioned doesn't just feel quiet, it is. And I noticed that because it's not. Your footsteps echo softly and you can hear far off noises in the background like birds chirping or people talking. For what is a loud set-piece filled action game, there is a surprising amount of care given to creating a genuine sense of ambience. Little quiet moments that let you take in the world and everything going on. There are even plenty of small objects you can pick up and examine, and while it can be silly, since it sometimes requires you to stand and just stare at your gun or something for a few seconds, it still shows the care here for small details. It's a nice world to be in, and it does draw you in through these small details and overall atmosphere. It's great, and I mention it now because it's the best part of the game. The director for this was someone called Dana Jan, who previously did art for World of Warcraft and one of the PSP God of Wars, and that kind of makes sense, since gameplay here feels forced compared to creating an environment. I'm not saying that's the case for every game directed by someone who's previously an artist. It can go differently, like with Nomura and Kingdom Hearts, and Dana Jan even went on to direct Lone Echo, which I've heard is great, but it's a daunting job, and if it's your first time, it makes sense that you'd lean heavily on what you know, and that's what I think happened with The Order. This is a cinematic experience, meaning there's a lot of sections where you slowly walk, and the actual tasks you're given can feel scattered and coreless. There's shooting, lockpicking, this science thing, stealth, fighting, scouting, and one puzzle. None of these are very fleshed out or complicated. They appear and then disappear. It's like a Call of Duty campaign's vehicle sections and gadgets, which only appear once, but here they appear just frequently enough and are given just enough attention for you to notice how simplistic they are. The proper one-on-one werewolf fights specifically feel really out of place. Despite the picture on the box, the marketing showing them, and the mechanics which are made uniquely for these fights, they only appear, I think, like twice, and they're so easy that it feels on rails. You have a meter to build up a legendary attack, but I don't know what fills it or if being hit drains it or anything, and it doesn't matter because the fight's over in a second anyway. Even if the fight was long, I would rather spam light and heavy attacks endlessly because there's no consequence to just flailing at the enemy. I'm gonna explain something like really basic here, but bear with me. You know how in most games you see the enemy do an animation to build up an attack, and that tells you to dodge so you're not in their way when the rest of the animation plays out? In this, a QuickTime event appears, and if you succeed, you dodge, but if you fail, a cutscene plays of you being hit. It feels very rigid and predetermined, and means that positioning yourself doesn't really matter. The atmosphere is great, and watching these fights play out is fun, but the way it actually plays is really awkward. None of this matters though. Pretend I spent this time, like, criticising the lockpicking minigame, because despite the high production, that's essentially what these are. Quick breaks between the rest of the gameplay to keep it from feeling repetitive. Except lockpicking minigames usually aren't used for the final boss. I'd actually quite like that. The lockpicking in this game's kind of neat. You twist the stick until the vibrations in the controller get stronger. Like, it's simple, but I don't know, it's kind of cool and engaging, I like it. The main focus though is the shooting, and it's kind of fine, I guess. The presentation definitely helps, giving it a kind of punchy grittiness. Little bits of smoke and dust fly about, guns all sound good and feel impactful both when using them and getting hit by them. Recoil isn't a huge deal, but is there and gives everything a kind of shakiness. The presentation helps a lot in making it feel fairly engaging, even if the shooting is kind of subpar. It's not free and open like something like Uncharted, it's more clunky and beefy like Gears of War. Your character's kind of clunky, so you don't want to spend too much time out of cover and try to find ways to avoid doing so, like sprinting between cover or sneaking around it. The enemies don't reflect this though. Gears of War has kind of tough enemies with lots of health, which encourages flanking or catching them out of cover. Here though, enemies have very little health, so you can just shoot them when they pop up to shoot you. You might lose health, but you won't die, and if you wait a second you'll be fine again. It encourages a very passive way of playing, and so does the enemy's AI. Most of the enemies you fight will sit there in cover and never move. They don't charge you, so it just becomes a shooting gallery. There are shotgun guys who never take cover and will charge you, but fights with them have you either spot them and easily kill them, or they sneak up on you and you die. It ends up that you spend a lot of time just sitting, aiming and shooting. It's kind of dull. There's a video of the Order on YouTube which is aggressive gameplay, and they just use this gun called the coach gun. I don't blame them, it's the best thing in the game. It's massively overpowered, kills everything in one shot, and like, look at the crosshair. The reason they use this though is because, well, for one, it's great. But also, it's the only weapon that allows for any kind of aggression. You'll just get gunned down immediately if you use anything else. There are some other weapons which are kind of overpowered and fun, but they also require you to be in cover. You're forced into a really passive playstyle because of the enemies and weapons, apart from the coach gun. But there's another thing which I've awkwardly shifted past, and that's that the movement is awful, really bad. Everything feels really slow and sluggish. Again, it's like Gears of War, but that at least has fairly quick turning and an actual quick turn function, meaning you don't have to awkwardly wait for the character to turn 180 degrees before running away. The Order isn't like this though. The camera feels less like a game camera and more like a film camera that slowly swoops round. You can kinda deal with it when you have to look left or right, but if you have to turn around, you're kinda fucked since there's no quick turn. There's a dodge, but that's only really useful for getting away from grenades. You'd think this isn't a huge thing to deal with since the rest of the game is so passive, it's just a bit disappointing, but occasionally the game will throw these armoured guys at you. They walk slowly towards you and they're tough to deal with since you probably won't kill them in time and will have to move out of cover, which... what the fuck? I didn't even mention, I couldn't find a way to reliably turn round cover. I'm sure it's there, but in combat I shouldn't really be looking for these things, they should just happen. There isn't one big problem with the Order's combat, but all the little issues add into just feeling boring and not incentivizing you to play in any fun way. I guess again it feels like a cinematic experience where gameplay is kind of de-emphasised. There are also the parts where werewolves attack you in groups and that just has you standing in a corner shooting them and then dodging when it tells you to. Again, like, cool atmosphere, cool idea, but what you're doing is kind of boring. The rest of the gameplay is just the cinematic stuff you'd expect, like walking and quick time events. There's constantly cutscenes and stuff to take control away from you. One bit I remember had like a cutscene, and then you walk for 30 seconds, and then another cutscene plays. It's just kind of silly. Even when you have control, random stuff is disabled. When going through walking sections, you can't reload or change weapons, and even in some of the shooting sections, you can't take cover in a cover-based shooter. It feels like it doesn't want you to play, and that would be something that's kind of like annoying on later playthroughs and not so bad a first time if the story was cool, but let me put on my glasses for this, which I have now because I'm just so smart. Oh, they're not in the case, oops. Shit. Alright, the story isn't good. And as I said, it's in an alternate universe London where there's werewolves and King Arthur's knights. There's also the weird steampunk stuff and a guy you meet called Nikola Tesla who I'm pretty sure is real, but I don't know who he is. I'm not some nerd who knows these things. I got an F in physics in high school, have you know? Despite this, the game keeps telling me what Mercury is. I don't want to know. Stop telling me stuff. It's a world you've probably seen before in some capacity, but that doesn't make it any less interesting to be in. I've already said that the atmosphere helps this world feel interesting, but the writing seems fairly happy to skim over it. You're kind of just tossed in, and while newspaper headlines and audio logs try to deepen the world, there isn't much care given to actually introducing you to it. Since the first thing you do as an Order member is fight werewolves and mad people who I think are also werewolves, you'd assume that's what the Order does in general, but no, they're also fighting the rebels who aren't werewolves. So what's the point of the Order, really? The rebels also feel kind of thrown in. You don't get any big reason to think they're evil, you're just told they're the evil rebels, shoot them. And that in turn made me think, oh, these guys aren't evil, are they? But I'll leave that for a second. There is a character, Marquis, who is very obviously supposed to be the new guy used as an excuse to bring up exposition. He asks Sir Galahad about certain characters and he'll respond with their whole life. The writing for it's clunky, but it could be useful for teaching the player the world if he actually asked about the world. Obviously he's not a time traveller, and he's been in the Order for some time, so he doesn't really ask much you'd actually want to know. To give credit, it's not like the writers didn't try to integrate you into the world more smoothly. They do explain things like the black water, which keeps them alive, but it's not enough. There's a wiki for this game that has a lot of pages for different characters and factions and stuff with a world that's clearly fairly deep, but it's all for a 7-hour linear third-person shooter which spends a lot of time ignoring story. It's too big and lore-heavy for what it's trying to be, so straight away not looking at any plot stuff it can feel disorientating. But the plot by comparison is fairly basic. Galahad is in the Order and he goes about with his team of love interest, sex pest, and dad's mentor guy. Things are normal for the first act, but then his mentor dies and he finds out he was killed for knowing too much about the Order's leader actually being a werewolf. The Order's leader, by the way, is called Jacob van Neck. Like, I don't know what they were expecting. You can trust Mr. Axe Murderer. He's not an axe murderer, I swear. Anyway, he joins the rebels to reveal the truth, but becomes distant from the people he knows and is removed from the Order. I like the ideas, and I think it could be fairly interesting if, again, this wasn't an action-heavy 7-hour game with little time dedicated to writing. It's odd, you'd think it pulled back the gameplay for the story, but the story feels like something that was pulled back for the gameplay. The way Galahad becomes estranged from his squad in the Order is interesting, since through the 4 of them on the box and the way they treat each other at the start, I wasn't really expecting them to turn on him in a kind of sad and uncomfortable way, but it doesn't hit as hard as it could as they aren't very fleshed out. As I've said, there are plenty of walking sections, but these are just silent for whatever reason. They don't spend this time exploring the characters, it's just nothing. In fact, conversations during missions often feel kind of lifeless. They talk in that kind of military way where they're reporting everything rather than telling it, and it means that when you get to the later half of the game and you're expected to care for these characters on an emotional level, it comes off as kind of hollow. There's one part where Galahad says he trusts one of the characters like a brother, and like, it may be true for the character, but as the player you've barely seen them. Like, genuinely until this point I thought he was meant to be a kind of rivalish mean guy because he's the love interest, Isabu's brother, and he just looks kind of pointy. I don't trust him, so when he turns into a werewolf and betrays you, I said I fucking knew it rather than feel any shock. This shady bitch. Guess what his name is, by the way, knowing he's a werewolf? It's Sir Lucan. None of them have normal names, I don't know what it is. So the plot goes along, it feels kind of empty with none of the characters really hitting, and then it just kind of ends. The ending's really strange. You're going up to kill Mr. Knack, and then you meet Lucan. You have a fight, and his dad, another member of the Order, appears and says, hey, it's been a shame for Lucan because he's been alive for ages as this evil werewolf. So Galahad says, you knew about the werewolf Order leaders? You could reveal it. And the dad says, no, that would destroy the Order, also it killed my son. So Galahad shoots Lucan, and then the game ends. Like right there, you never fight the Knack guy, and that's just kind of left. I'm generally okay with somewhat vague endings like this. Dead Rising has it, The Matrix has it. I think these use it well. The idea is that while the in-universe plot hasn't been completely resolved, the writing has made its point, and the ending concludes the themes instead. I think the point of the scene is to completely break Galahad from the Order and to show that there's no way for him to return to the people he knew and how life was, but this doesn't do that very well. I think one of my biggest issues is that Lucan is one of the characters to lead this, since for whatever reason I really hate Lucan. No, it's just that, like I said a minute ago, Lucan is kind of an insignificant character who isn't given a lot of time. He isn't in that initial squad or anything, and he betrays you the only time you spend a lot of a mission with him. This scene would have made much more sense if the other character was Izzy. Maybe don't shoot her, but she is Galahad's love interest, and they do make a point of her distancing herself while still having feelings for him. But she doesn't really get a conclusion, and this would have been the perfect place to have that conclusion. Instead though, it just feels kind of weak. Also, there's an after credits part, and it makes it feel even worse. It shows that Galahad has to leave the city due to what he's done, but also I'm pretty sure signals that he never even tried to reveal that the Order leader's a werewolf, they just gave up. I wouldn't mind it being revealed that, oh, Galahad failed, the Order lives on, but oh, Galahad didn't bother, the Order lives on just isn't quite as good. I can't reveal this, it would shake the Order to its foundation. Okay, sorry to have bothered you, I'm sorry. It's a shame because I feel like the story could have been interesting. The characters aren't given enough time to talk, but they could be fun as a more human and down-to-earth feeling squad than something like Gears of War. And also if they introduced this world mode smoothly, it could have been decent. In fact, the whole game feels like it has some potential. I don't dislike the game actually. I know people like to be the smarmy critic who doesn't care about graphics, but the overall atmosphere and attention to detail does add something. It feels claustrophobic, grimy, and real in a way that not many other games can achieve. Its story isn't great, but that atmosphere does draw you in, and there's not much outright bad in the gameplay to get in the way of that. In fact, it has fun moments thanks to the presentation. The game's also cheap and not too long, so I'm honestly kind of leaning on recommending this, despite everything wrong with it. But there is a lot wrong with it. This is one of those games where I recommend it if you're actively interested, but otherwise it's not something you should go out of your way to play. If it's accessible to you and you want to play it, I'd go ahead, but if you don't want to play it, then don't. Just don't. It's not really good, and the reception it received is kind of warranted. The fact this released in 2015 for £50 is kind of a huge rip-off. I'm not the sort of person to complain about 4 hours, but this is silly. It's £50 for about 7 hours that are fine. And once you're done with those 7 hours, that's pretty much you. No extras, no reason to replay, it's done. Compare this to Titanfall 2, which is shorter but fills those hours with so many different ideas and feels constantly engaging, along with giving you a well-made multiplayer mode. The new Resident Evil 8. Oh shit, that was new when I wrote this. Resident Evil 8's only a couple hours longer if you rush through it, but similarly fills those hours with interesting ideas, multiple, theatrical, entertaining villains, whole arcs somehow fitting entire game ideas into an hour, and unlockables that make you go back and play again. Hell, there's even Wolfenstein: The New Order, another shorter but still full-price game which, like The Order, doesn't have any extra modes, only that campaign, but you go to so many places in those hours and it tells a really well-rounded and complete story. There's also Half-Life, Uncharted, all sorts. Going back to The Order, which feels very samey throughout and doesn't really do much with its story, you can see that this isn't really a length issue, it just doesn't do much with that time or really excel anywhere. If you bought this full price when it came out, I'd say it's pretty fair to feel ripped off. But I kind of liked it. It has a ton of flaws, but they don't get in the way too much, and there is stuff to like here. If you like horror games or just a good frick atmosphere, then I'd actually play it. You might get something out of it, and there isn't much to lose. Oh fuck. Let's take a break from the two big games of the video and talk about Knack. Like a quick snack break where the snack is oil, or the snack is Knack. Snack is Knack. I was originally just going to talk about the other two games because Knack isn't really a failed series under my definition for the video, as in it got a sequel, but articles about that sequel sales have comments like, haha lol. If Knack's a success, then so am I. Oh no. You've probably seen the memes of Knack, and the joke basically is, haha, Knack is shit innit, Lamau, and he is. That's it. There's nothing more to it than that. Knack is just shit. I've wasted 10 hours of my life. I'm just gonna be upfront, this game's terrible. Like, most of my time with it was pretty awful, but it's not really awful. Like, it doesn't have that many terrible decisions in the design. It doesn't feel actively bad to play, it's just that it's really underwhelming. It's aggressively bland and doesn't go anywhere. I thought it was fine at the start, but after about half an hour I thought, oh, okay, that's enough. And then it kept going for 10 hours. The big gimmick of Knack is that he can grow larger for these relics, but in practice it's like a kid's God of War essentially. You go through levels beating things up and dodging attacks, but there aren't any combos or anything, and the whole thing feels a bit less complex. Enemy attacks are easy to read and dodge, and you simply punch an enemy a couple times to kill them. It's not bad, to be fair. It has this simple boxing-like feel which can be satisfying. It's very readable and doesn't ever lean into button mashing, but it's carrying the whole game and doesn't do much to distract you. The game takes direct influence from Crash Bandicoot, and that game has similarly basic gameplay, but well, for one, it's not 10 hours long. I'm sorry that I've gone from complaining about a 7-hour game being too short to a 10-hour game being too long, but like, this is too long for what it is. Also, Crash's levels can have you charging through on a hog, climbing a castle wall on a rainy night, or creeping through a dark cave. In Knack though, it all feels the same. You go through so many mines filled with the same enemies doing the same thing. There were 2 points where I actually quite liked it. The one was the city level. It has Knack as a big kaiju thing towering over all the buildings. It doesn't do anything differently, but it has a sense of scale. People scream at Knack, and it's just, you know, a childlike idea the game should be showing more often. The other bit was where you get to switch between Knack and Stealth Knack. Stealth Knack can go through lasers but is terrible in combat, so you switch between the two. It's a neat little idea that distracts you from the simplicity of the overall gameplay. Neither of these are big changes, they're just small gimmicks, but they're enough to make the game more interesting. Instead though, it's just the same vanilla gameplay endlessly, and they really struggle with moving from that. There's one other gimmick where Knack can add stuff like ice to his body, which gives him a kind of temporary health boost that comes and goes. It's not a huge change, it's definitely not big enough to distract you, but it's something, I guess. They use it as the big gimmick for 5 chapters. They use this gimmick, which is at best okay 5 times, with very minor variations like it's metal now, which can be removed by magnets. Ooh, these are the most interesting parts of the game, by the way. I hope you're really hyped for Knack by now. What makes it kinda worse is that even with how basic the gameplay is, it's got a bunch of flaws. There are 2 little mechanics which pull the game away from the punching and walking a little. You can build up a meter to do a special, more powerful moves, and you can find gadgets and secret areas which give you little upgrades. These are also both fairly basic mechanics, and they fucked them up somehow. The upgrades are a neat idea, but like, rather than having a system where you get an upgrade point and put them into one of these upgrades or something, you find secret chests which give you 1 part towards an upgrade. An upgrade? It could be a part for any of the upgrades in the game, and a lot of these upgrades have a bunch of parts which are only found randomly in these chests, which aren't that frequent. This means that I didn't get a single one of these upgrades until the 9th chapter out of the game's 13 because I kept getting parts for upgrades I didn't even know existed. These upgrades aren't even anything incredible. The one I got on the 9th chapter just meant the collectible that charges your special move will now also refill some health if my health is low. Like, it's alright, but it required 7 of these randomly assigned parts? The fuck? Also, I forgot to mention, but this recording pause notification appears every time you get a chest. No idea why. I guess it's because it shows my friends list. It has a system where you get more options for what upgrade to get depending on how many friends got this chest, so I guess I've accidentally exposed a friend's PSN username. I'm a terrible person, I know. After a point they seemed to give up on the game and then that list was empty because who else was playing Knack? But even then it still shows this recording notification every single time, but it's not hiding anything. Really weird. The special moves are broken as well. They take forever to charge, and if you use one then die, then it's gone, it's had no effect. So I never used them. It's not a quick little burst of power, it's something you have to premeditate to a degree that's just not fun. I never used it as a strategic decision in combat. It was basically just, I've died here 5 times, I don't want to do this checkpoint again. Oh yeah, I was dying 5 times at single checkpoints, by the way. The difficulty's kind of all over the place. I'd call it a hard game, but I don't think that was the intention. There are plenty of times where you march through just fine, and then suddenly an enemy will kill you in 1 hit, and from there, like, sure, it's hell, why not? It starts throwing all these enemies at you who will all attack you at once, and checkpoints will be 5 minutes ago, and then it's like a kid's game again. It's bizarre and really exhausting. It's not a fun challenge because it's the same basic combat, only you can't make a single mistake now, I guess. It's some of the most rapid difficulty spikes I've ever seen. Speaking of spikes, that was good, I'm glad I wrote that down. Let me just repeat it quickly. Speaking of spikes, I can't stop myself from laughing at that one, that's too good. Speaking of spikes, pause for laughter, I briefly mentioned the fact Knack grows and then immediately passed by it. This is because it's kind of the main thing of the game, it's the point of Knack, but at the same time, it's not really relevant to the actual game. I think it's a cool idea. You start tiny and then as the level progresses, Knack grows and usually ends the level as a big climactic monster. It's a fun selling point that I think would appeal to kids, and even as an ancient 77-year-old, I still thought it was pretty fun. I always seeked out more health because I wanted to see Knack grow, but it is very easy to forget. The game doesn't change at all as you grow. You can usually find equivalent enemies between the ones you fight when you're small and the ones you fight when you're big. They do try throwing in occasional small enemies to remind you Knack is big, but the game is functionally the exact same. It's just a cool little gimmick, I guess, which would be maybe enough if there was more to the game elsewhere, but like, I've covered it all at this point. This is everything. It's the whole game. It's very basic combat with very basic levels, and anything else it tries is either really flawed or not very common. It's not awful, it's very playable, but it's really, really boring. As I've said, it takes inspiration from classic platformers, but its gameplay reminds me more of PS2 movie tie-in beat-em-ups. And this was one of the big launch titles in 2013 for the PS4. It was front and centre as the next generation, but it feels like the scraps of the previous generation. At least gameplay wise. The story and presentation and all that are, they're here as well. Knack's about Knack. He was built as a weapon of war against the goblins, so him, an adventurer guy, a child, a scientist, and an evil man who betrays you early on go to fight the goblins, but this is sidetracked for a kind of arms race to acquire, or later destroy, the power of the relics which Knack is made of. It's very standard and very bland, but also fucks up somehow. It's like the gameplay, I guess. I was curious who wrote this, so I checked, and it was Mark Cerny, which makes total sense. Not because he's got this like flair to his writing you can always see, but because it feels completely phoned in. Mark Cerny, by the way, is mostly a game designer and programmer. He's done a lot, you might have heard of him, but For one, he's not a writer, from what I can tell, and along with writing, he was directing Knack. And it was his first time directing a game. I don't know him personally, but I'm gonna take a wild guess and say he was maybe a little bit busy and didn't have the time to sit down and really give all his attention to the writing, so what you have feels like it was generated by an AI. Every character feels like a stereotype, there's no kind of world building or cohesive vision for the writing. There are jokes, but they're like the literal definition of a joke. You know what I mean? Like, one was the scientist going through a narrow path and he said, haha, this would have been easier when I was younger, and it's like, yeah, it's a joke, but can you imagine anyone genuinely laughing at that? Like, haha, it's true, it would have been easier when he was younger. I know I'm being really shit and saying like, oh actually I didn't find the jokes in the kids game funny, but like, you know, it kinda shows how bland it all is. It feels really weak as well, like no one's really bothered about anything. They have that ending where the mentor gives his apprentice a heartfelt speech, but it lasts all of 2 seconds and just sounds like, yeah, thanks, I guess. There's a bit where the nephew kid is kidnapped and they just kind of watch it happen. They don't run after him or anything. It's like they missed a bus and they're watching it drive away. Like, it's irritating, but it's fine, there's no point in running after him. There's 2 main villains in the game and they both just vanish. Neither of them get a big boss fight or anything, it's really weird. The final boss is against some demon that I don't think appears in the rest of the game. Really underwhelming stuff like this happens all the time, and like I keep thinking I'm misremembering and the game actually had this big epic boss fight, but no, the game's gaslighting me, nothing happens. So generally the plot is functional, I guess, but really dull and has little flaws along with that. I mean, this is a game where the main enemies are evil green goblins and robots, and that kinda summarises it. You know, who the fuck cares? You might have noticed a pattern there though between the gameplay and the story, and that continues with the overall presentation for the game. As I said, Knack was a big launch title for the PS4, showing off how powerful it was and everything it could do, and I guess it kind of does. I don't think this could run on a PS3, it's really detailed and there's loads of small objects, but as I've established, I'm no science person, I'm an idiot child who wants to be wowed by the shiny things, and Knack doesn't really wow me. It never did. I remember even when I was 12 and this was coming out, I didn't give a shit. I don't care that it was rapidly draining natural resources to render Knack, because he looks like an idiot. You know how you get those rules for cartoony character designs where it's like a child should be able to draw them? What do you do with Knack? He's like a million parts. I don't even know how to draw him. Where do you start? How do you sell toys? Even if he was a solid object, he's made of spikes. You couldn't put him in your mouth, so what's the point? I don't think many kids would want to buy toys of him anyway, because look at him. He's just a bit rubbish. The whole thing looks a bit blig. It reminds me of those animated films you've probably seen posters for, but aren't real. You know, like Strange Magic, Alpha and Omega, Delgo. Tell me you've seen Delgo. You can't. No one has. But that's the feeling I get from the way Knack looks. It's this technically fine 3D animation with cartoony characters, but it lacks any of the charm from similar games. You compare this to something like Super Mario 3D World, which came out in the same year on worse hardware, and Mario looks better. It's brighter, more colourful, and I'm home alone. I don't know what that knocking was, so I don't know. If I die, finish the Knack video for me, I guess. It's brighter, more colourful, and doesn't take place entirely in mines. Meanwhile, everyone in Knack looks like they're made of rock, and everything feels really muted, and this is comparing it to one of the more visually bland Mario games. This is probably somewhat because Knack's going for a more realistic tone, kind of, but that doesn't mean you have to stare at concrete the whole game, and it doesn't help that the rest of the game feels the exact same, a bland mush of technically functional but completely dull elements. I know I'm not being very positive at all, but I really don't have much good to say here, and I know it's not really made for me. I'm sitting here in my black and red room wearing a Dead Kennedys t-shirt and complaining about a children's game, but I don't think kids would like it much either. It's too slow and sticks with the same thing for way too long. I think they would like the idea of Knack changing size, and there's almost an action figure-ish feeling to the combat and characters, but I think they'd get bored or get stuck with how tediously difficult it is way before they'd get to the city level, which shows off the elements I think kids would like the most. Also, there's no creativity or exploration or anything. This might just be me, but a lot of my favourite games when I was younger were games that let you play around with them. Jak and Daxter, Little Big Planet, Minecraft, all games I loved and all let you free to do what you want. And I think that's true with a lot of kids. You look at what's popular with them and it's like Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox, games that are not very handholdy and let you interact with them in the way you want to. Kids have a very rigid life, they don't have much choice in what they do, so I think Knack's idea of making a kids game simply by making it linear and simplistic is kind of outdated almost. We're stepping into the future by releasing a game that takes heavy influence from the first Crash Bandicoot. Like, I think there's just more to it than that. Not that Knack needs a colouring book or something packaged in with it, but I think some kind of player expression would go a long way. I'll at least give it credit for releasing an actual game targeted at children on the video game console children would want. Do you remember the PS4 and Xbox One launch titles? Without Knack, it's the game equivalent of like sitting a child down and letting it watch a Wicker Man burning. I'm not trying to be all sensory and all that. I thought like Pinhead was really cool when it was free for some reason, but you know, I don't think it's too bad to have another option besides this. But with all that said, imagine Knack releasing last year alongside the PS5. Like, all the new tech and stuff aside, there are actual games suitable for children here, and now that praise of, wow, it's a real classic kids platformer, kind of falls apart. As soon as it's competing with more than the middle-aged British guy talking about cars, I think most kids would lose interest quickly. So if this kids game wouldn't appeal to kids, what's the point really? Well, who is it serving? No one. It's just kind of this bland whatever that, as I said, is only really remembered through memes. I obviously don't recommend it. I don't recommend it to anyone really, it's just kind of a waste. I've heard the sequel's better, and the game did have a messy development, but even if you fixed a lot of the little issues like difficulty, it still has such a dull identity that I don't know how much of a difference it would make. But of course, out of all these games it got a sequel, and that's kind of disappointing. This is the one time I'll complain that the cheery kids platformer got a sequel instead of the grungy third-person shooter or open-world zombie game. Whilst Will's recording this, I accidentally got a ring stuck on my finger. I can't get it off. Fuck. It's hard not to be kind of cynical going into Days Gone. It's a third-person, open-world zombie game with a skill tree you climb by taking over camps where you kill enemies through stealth, which involves hiding in bushes, crouching behind enemies and pressing a button to kill them, or throwing a distraction to make them walk somewhere else, or fighting them in cover-based shooting where you use a slow-motion mode. There's a plotline about a grumpy man looking after a child, crafting, hunting, no fishing though. How do you make a game about the American countryside and not have fishing? The fuck? The point is, it's very, very cliched. None of the footage you're seeing right now is actually from Days Gone. I've just put random games that use the same mechanics. It's possibly the most cliched game I've ever played, but I don't know, I kinda liked it. More recently, I've seen plenty of people being more positive towards it, in fact. When the sequel was revealed to be turned down, a lot of people seemed angry, which I kind of thought was odd. I didn't dislike the game's existence, but I definitely wouldn't have played it if I wasn't making this video. Like, look at it and keep in mind it's between 40 and 60 hours long. Like, there's so much other stuff I've been meaning to play, why would I put that time into something so looking? My opinion wasn't uncommon. I've seen plenty of people pass this game by because of how generic it looks. This was even a problem in reviews. Hell, I saw people outright hate the game because of all this, but again, I'm coming away from it having genuinely enjoyed it. It honestly might be on par with Ghost of Tsushima for me, another big PlayStation exclusive open world, but one that was received much better and is apparently getting a sequel. Like Ghost of Tsushima, I like it more because of how well it plays rather than story reasons, although the writing here isn't terrible. I definitely prefer it to Ghost of Tsushima in that aspect. This game takes obvious heavy influence from The Walking Dead and Sons of Anarchy, neither of which I've seen. Although, I have seen Psychomania, which is about undead bikers. That's like both, right? I don't know, kinda. It takes the whole biker gangish drama feel of Sons of Anarchy and the overall world building of The Walking Dead, I think. As I've said, I've not seen either, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or bad thing. There might be some fun twists if you've seen those programs, or it might be really derivative, I'm honestly not sure. Either way, I don't really mind the story. It's about Deacon St. John, a biker whose wife is dead. It's a really smooth way of writing that, well done me. His wife is presumably dead. He put her on a helicopter when the zombie outbreak started and the camp she was sent to was overrun, so it's like, yeah, she's probably not doing too great, but he's clung on to the idea that she could still be alive. Him and his friend Boozer are planning on moving away from their home to get away from the past memories, but his arm is burned and they have to wait for that to heal before doing anything. The summary of, yeah, they just kind of wait might seem odd for the plot, but there isn't really one main focused plotline throughout the game. Obviously there are plotlines and goals and certain ones get more focused than others, but again this ties back to its TV influences. The plot is structured kind of like a TV show with multiple plot lines and characters that disappear and reappear throughout the overall story, and it's difficult to talk about a narrative with this kind of structure without being kind of spoilery, so here's your warning, I guess. Leave, you fucking monster, and don't come back. I kinda like having a spoiler section in the video. Like, this is the spoiler club, you only get in here if you've played the game or don't really care, you know, it's exclusive, ooh. So I lied. There is kind of a main plotline. Deacon finds out a scientist who was on the helicopter with his wife is still alive, so that leads to the scientist helping him find his wife. His wife's name is Sarah, by the way. I should probably mention that. This is the biggest plotline in the game. It probably has the most time dedicated to it, and it's the most high-stake one, but that's only really because most of the other ones focus on Deacon's relationships with the other characters. This is a mostly low-key, character-driven story, and those characters feel pretty decently written. They all feel fairly human and relatable, and convey a sense of character pretty easily, even with their kind of generic kind of feel. Even shopkeepers have a sense of character. It's not like Hades levels, but Jessie ended up as like my favourite, and she's just someone you sell stuff to in the camp you probably spend the least time in. Her dialogue, appearance and performance has this slightly odd but perfectly friendly feeling to it, and I like that that level of detail was given to such a minor character. This is consistent throughout as well. I didn't catch any merchants that felt like, you know, merchants, like a menu with a voice. They all had some sense of character to them, even though some of them I would have only spoken to like twice. This isn't even talking about actual main characters who can be generic, but each feel like people with worldviews, experiences and personalities. Also, Deacon is there. This guy, Jesus Christ. So this is kind of weird and fun. In normal story sections where he's with other characters, he's fairly normal, feels the same as all the others, he's just going about doing his thing. He comes off as kind of distant and non-committal, but, you know, has a good heart deep down. I don't know, he's kind of like one of the less interesting characters if you're basing him on cutscenes. He feels just kind of like a generic dude. At times I can't even really stand him. Like, there's a bit where he's meeting his wife for the first time, and he just complains about his ex throughout the whole thing. And it's like, what are you doing? What? But when he leaves camp and he gets into combat and all that, all hell breaks loose, and it's kind of wonderful. He does that thing where game characters say little phrases when they kill an enemy, but he just enjoys it way too much. His delivery is violent and angry, and he mutters out all his one-liners, and it's like, alright, sorry. He gives the impression of one of those guys that would come up to you all nice and ask for cigarettes, and then if you don't have any, they just fucking screech at you. I saw someone describe his voice acting as like a weird border between really good and terrible, and that's kind of it. It's so unrestrained sounding and feels both kind of funny but also uncomfortable. It sounds like he's properly letting out pent-up frustrations, putting all his anger into the things he's fighting. When you fight stuff like the violent cult and the Rippers, you get such a sense of hatred towards them, and it's just like, ow. This isn't just in combat either. There's this radio station you hear, which is all, you know, kind of conspiracy theory-ish stuff, and Deacon doesn't like that one bit, so he shouts out his responses with no one around, like he's a commentary YouTuber or something. It's really strange, but it also kind of fits perfectly. You know, he's been about killing to survive, eating dog food probably. He would go a bit mad, I guess, but not so mad that he's actually insane. It's just a kind of shakiness, which adds some life to the character, I guess. Part of me does want an open world game where you're just some aimless weirdo with a knife. Like, there's no morality system or anything. You just scream at people and give them rabies. As for this though, it's kinda neat, and despite being a kind of strange choice, the one that seems to have ruined the game for quite a few people, I don't know, it genuinely adds to Deacon's characterization for me. I don't like Deacon, but he's at least more memorable than I expected. However, at the same time, I'm editing this and watching the cutscenes and stuff, and oh god, I just don't like him. There's a very, very different experience between thinking about how he acts in gameplay and stuff, and then writing about it, and just watching the cutscenes. And I don't know how to put it into words, but there's just a really visceral cringe to him in cutscenes and in story stuff, when he actually has to act like a human. And it's just... Like, I've got a cutscene up here where he's trying to be all inspiring and the music swells up and all that, and it feels like I'm being scammed. Apart from Deacon though, these people, along with the slightly low-key plot elements, make the world really easy to fall into and make small moments feel more impactful than anything in the order. At the start of the game, Boozer's arm being burnt isn't treated well as Boozer refuses help. It's clear that this isn't the right way to deal with it, but he starts seeming more frustrated and distant. He has moments of hallucination and outbursts, and those scenes have a strong sense of tension to them that you wouldn't get if there wasn't this quiet tone and depth to characters. People complain about the really cheesy stuff like... I can't fucking read this, Jesus Christ. I want you to ride me like your bike. And Deacon wearing a backwards hat at his wedding, which are really cheesy moments but feel somewhat earned in context. Somewhat. That wedding scene actually plays as a flashback, as Deacon is saying his sort of final goodbyes to his wife after she's basically confirmed to be dead. It's not very well done. There is that line, and they interrupt this quiet cutscene with random enemies walking in twice, which is bizarre and it kind of ruins the moods, but it's got the right idea, I guess. And despite being such a scattered plot focusing on all these different characters, it does feel somewhat tied under a theme of loss. Look at me using my high school English, wow. Multiple major characters lose something and they all deal with it in different ways. As I said, Deacon doesn't find his wife, so there is a point of him coming to accept this fact after years of desperately clinging on to her, with him then focusing more on the people still in his life rather than the one that's gone. The game ends with him saving the kind of daughtery person and him and Boozer taking down the Rippers who caused Boozer's arm to be burnt in the first place. The writing's far from perfect, but it covers so much and still feels contained, focusing on its pretty decently written characters and their personal struggles. I'm just kidding. The game still has like 20 hours after this point. The game ends here, it feels done. Every plot point has been covered, but then, for some reason, after all the searching for his wife and coming to terms with her death, Deacon thinks, oh yeah, she was employed? So he mentions it to the scientist guy, and Wouldn't you believe it, she's alive. She's working with a kind of army camp to try and make a cure for the zombies, but the commander leader guy just wants to blow them up. So Deacon joins the military to reconnect with his wife, not mentioning their history together. What? This part isn't awful, to be fair, it still has some decent characterization, but it's a really strange choice and gives off kind of hints of development issues. I'm not exaggerating with the sudden shift, it really does just decide to do something completely different before ending. You could just stop after defeating the Rippers and the plot would work fine. I don't know if it's another homage to American TV and how they never know how to end, but in its odd jump to another plot, it kinda ruins that theme I was talking about. Deacon's wife is alive. That scene of him saying goodbye for a last time is now meaningless because she's alive. I guess it's cute to see them together again after so much time, but I don't know, it's kinda dumb. Like, before it kinda felt like it was saying, oh, you shouldn't cling on to what was at the expense of what is, or whatever, but now it's like, nah, just keep going, you know, cling on to the past. This direct might have Bayonetta for you in it, you never know. I wrote that ages ago, I thought the game was cancelled. Again, it's not terrible, the character writing is still fairly decent, but it just cheapens the whole thing and turns from kind of generic and cheesy but has its moments to kind of and that's a bit disappointing. It does feel like this stems from development issues though. There are bits where Deacon feels like Sarah has become someone else, but then this is dropped completely and it feels odd. Like they were planning on doing more with it. It also just doesn't feel as polished or thought out as those earlier hours, with kind of weird map design and huge stretches of empty lands that end up unmasking the render distance. The story isn't great at all. I think it benefits quite a bit from me having The Order on my mind because it really excels in the places that The Order failed in. It takes its time to hook you into its world and characters and never deals with anything that's too, like, world-ending, and I think that helps it quite a bit. It's just a shame that everything it's hooking you into is pretty It pulled me along though, I was invested enough, and the game itself is what's worth it here anyway because that part's actually really fun. It appears very generic, but it's put together really nicely to the point where it feels like its own thing. Unlike the writing though, I am familiar with what this is taking elements from. It's mostly Far Cry, bits of The Last of Us and Red Dead are there, but its structure is essentially Far Cry with zombies. You go through the open world capturing camps and dealing with the wildlife, which earns you money to buy cool guns. It has that very similar sandboxy feeling where you can play with its systems to create havoc or just use the sniper if you feel lazy, but unlike Far Cry, it feels a lot more fun, kind of. That's probably not right, but it forces you into awkward situations and tells you to deal with them, which I feel a lot of sandbox games are too scared to do. At the same time though, it's not a survival horror game like I thought at first. It has its similarities, but this isn't The Last of Us where you'll pick up individual bullets and try to avoid confrontation like some feral rat with a gun. Instead, this is more like Resident Evil 4, where you're not really limited in resources, but limited enough to make use of everything. Instead of that feral rat with a gun, you're like this cat who sits outside my house at 2 AM and fights this fox. This is a thing that happens constantly, and I swear it's the same cat and the same fox every time, and I don't really know what they're up to, but they're fucking loud. You're scrappy and have to make do with limitations, but you're entirely capable, and knowing what you're doing feels really good. I found myself very quickly switching weapons to deal with different enemies, going from sniping far away ones to blowing up charging ones with a shotgun in seconds, constantly adjusting my approach for what I was dealing with. This sort of ambidextrousness is very common in games like Doom and Ratchet and Clank and stuff, but I find that more grounded games like Days Gone get a bit stuck. They give you an assault rifle and a pistol and say, shoot stuff with the assault rifle, only use the pistol if you really have to, but in Days Gone I never came across a useless weapon. Every tool was something I wanted to use, apart from maybe the crossbow. The drop off on that is really weird, but that's the only weapon I can think of that I didn't like. Everything else was consistently useful, including all the pistols and stuff you'd expect to feel kinda rubbish. This makes the basic combat reflect Deacon in a way. It's kind of mad, you don't smoothly plan everything out, but you feel very capable and like you're in control of the situation. It's like Ghost of Tsushima in that, while it looks kind of standard, they've really perfected little subtleties and it makes it way better than you'd expect. But this is just the basic combat, this isn't steering into enemy types or anything, which are also kind of interesting. Humans are fairly standard, but there are plenty of different creatures who act in different ways. You get your live animals, but you also get undead versions, and these things are vicious. Wolves are like the most dangerous enemy in the game because they just charge at you, it's mad. The zombies though are obviously the main creature. On their own they're pretty standard, they walk up to you and you dodge, otherwise they give you a quick fun enough to fight, but what's more interesting are the hordes. These were a big part of the marketing, and while they're not as prevalent as that might have made you think, they're still a really cool addition. Basically, certain locations have hordes of zombies, huge ones, and they can very easily just tear you apart, but there's no easy way to deal with them, so you have to work around them. They feel actually threatening and have a sense of scale you don't usually get in zombie games, surprisingly. Most games give you the resources to defend yourself to a degree, but here, I mean, you can try, but if you're caught, you need to escape really quickly. And since they're just there in the open world, they feel like an actual danger rather than a set piece, and I think they do what Breath of the Wild wanted to do with Rain, weirdly. They make you change your plans and give you a sense that this is a living, changing world. There was one point where I wanted to get my bike, but it was surrounded by a horde, so after looking around for a way to approach, I just decided to leave it, sneak back to a camp and sleep, get it back in the morning. The difference between this and the Rain in Breath of the Wild though is that this isn't just a roadblock that you have to wait for. I could have tried to distract them, run up and grab my bike, but I'm boring and I just went away because I probably would have died trying to get the bike. If I knew I was going to talk about this in the video, I probably would have actually tried, because I feel a bit dumb now just kind of being like, oh yeah, I saw this cool thing, I just kind of walked away from it, I don't want to die in the video game, you know? But it was giving me decisions rather than just removing options. In fact, they can be used as an option sometimes. They're attracted to sound obviously, so if you start a big gunfight near them, they'll hear it, but this works both ways. So, for example, there was this camp which was on a hill above a horde of zombies. I tried taking it out normally, shooting for everyone, but this attracted the zombies and they just pinned me down before I could officially claim the camp. So instead, I tricked the humans into firing at me, which then attracted the zombies to them while I kept hidden. It was a really fun moment, and at one point wolves came in randomly to attack the humans. So, I don't know, all sorts happens, it's quite good. But another interesting thing is that eventually you can deal with the hordes. After most of the game is done, you're given a mission where you're thrown in and told to deal with one of these huge hordes by throwing Molotovs at them, shooting, so on. And your success feels mad and really rewarding. Like, the whole game builds the hordes up as these big, scary, destructive things, and finally taking one down feels like such a big and risky task. It's really good, and the game feels balanced so that these are still a big deal. You have to dump so many resources into them that they still feel powerful. The hordes, while not the main gameplay element they were made out to be, are really well integrated as some of the most memorable zombie enemies I've ever seen. Like the hordes, the bike is another attempt to give this game identity that I don't think works amazingly. It's a neat idea, but doesn't really work the way it's intended. Basically, the bike you have is your bike. It's not like GTA or whatever where you take whatever vehicle you like. This is what you're driving throughout the game. You consistently upgrade it and customize it, and it has a satisfying little arc from a kind of slow whatever bike to this speedy monster with a fish on it, because I needed to put fishing somewhere. I'm going to interrupt what I'm saying here to point out that when I was talking about fishing, the waveform kind of looked like a fish. Quite pleased with that. Along with this, it needs to be maintained though. It can run out of petrol and needs to be repaired if it's damaged. Both of which are really cool concepts, and it's fun running out of fuel and being stranded in the desert. The one time it happens. Petrol and scrap are common enough, and you can always refuel or repair your bike at camps, so I never really ran out or got stranded or anything. It's still a fun concept though, and the couple times I had to deal with it were fun, but I wish they were a bit more strict and had this as more of a threat. These are still cool aspects though, and give the game its own feeling of open world, one that you don't mould but instead kicks you about. A really nice place to be for a bit. The only thing is the missions themselves. Main missions are fine, you get these bounty hunter missions which are fun, and the outpost missions are great, but everything else is a bit eh. There's these nest clearing missions where you have to find and then burn zombie nests. You throw a Molotov at them, zombies come out and you fight them. It's enjoyable enough because the combat's so punchy, but they're really easy and just kind of feel like busy work. Deacon does go mad while doing these objectives, so that's fun, but the actual objective is kind of eh. There's also the Nero checkpoints where you have to start up a generator by finding some fuel or a battery, and that's it. It's just find the thing. There might be some zombies at the checkpoint, but not a lot. The main drama of these objectives comes from when you turn the generator on, since these speakers go off and attract zombies, but you can just destroy the speakers before they go off. So these are basically just puzzles about navigating your environment, but the environment's basically the same every time, it's just the objects moved. Also, there's little random encounters where you save someone and send them to a camp for money or to unlock more stuff in that camp's shop, but these feel kind of unfinished. The NPCs have barely any different lines and you'll definitely hear them repeat stuff. On top of that, there's supposed to be somewhat of a choice which camp you send them to, but it's pretty meaningless. I forgot to mention, each camp has different things in their shops and you unlock more stuff by doing tasks for these camps and leveling up their trust, and they each have separate money, but yeah, the NPC's rewards are really unbalanced. Throughout most of the game you'll have 3 choices. 2 give you a tiny bit of money and a little bit of trust, and the third camp gives a decent amount of trust. The amount of money you get from the other camps is so pitiful that I never saw any reason to not take the third option. Especially considering in the world of the game, they're the nicest camp. It's like it's pushing you to pick that option, it's weird. I don't think it was finished properly. These are just kind of whatever though. The only one that was even slightly annoying was the hordes. Yeah, I mentioned that fun mission where you take down a horde. That was fun because of the context, but after that the game decides to mark every horde on the map as a side mission. I didn't do a lot of these, especially because they appear at the end, but I was pretty sick of them even after doing only like 4, and 3 of those are mandatory main missions. While they feel pretty grand at first, what you're actually doing is kind of dull. You run away from them and occasionally turn around to attack. It's not very hard and you're not doing a lot, but at the same time the zombies will tear you up if you make a mistake, so it's this awkward limbo of both being kind of mindless and boring but also stressful and demanding. On top of this, they always require a bunch of resources. There's no getting around that, but also, and this is a problem for the nests which require Molotovs as well, you can't buy everything. You can buy ammo and occasionally a grenade or something, but stuff like Molotovs, which you will need to be crafted with specific resources, and you can't buy these resources. They're not uncommon, but you just have to hope you find them randomly in the open world. This is awkward for the nests because it meant I'd sometimes have to just leave and come back later, but it makes the hordes really annoying because they're at the end of the game. By the time the map was showing all the hordes, I was basically done with all other content. So it's not like I could destroy a horde, resupply by claiming a camp, and then do another horde. It was basically just, I would do a horde, and then that was it. I just have to hope the supplies showed up somewhere. So those objectives can be messy and the writing has its problems, but I kind of like this game. It's just really solid as an open world game. The combat feels great, the world feels alive, and the writing has some good moments. So I disagree with the reception it got, right? Kind of? Not really though. It seems to be scored around a 7 out of 10, and yeah, if I was to score it, that's probably what I'd pick, but I don't know if that means something else to me than it does to this guy or whoever. Like, the game's really solid, but it's nothing incredible. It's a good, solid video game time, and sometimes, I don't know, that's enough. I'm really excited for the sequel now. I think they were making a sequel. This video is so long, I can't remember. This isn't a must-play or anything, especially with how long it is, but if you see it for the £12 it goes for, then sure. Or if you got it from the PlayStation Plus thing a couple months back. Or if you just have a PS5 and PlayStation Plus. There's a good chance you already accidentally own this if you own a PlayStation. My point is though, if this looks fun to you, it is. Have fun. Sometimes solid is enough, and I guess I've accidentally looked back. I picked these games mostly at random, but they kind of show the variety of qualities in games outside of the fancy Metacritic's 80+ club. The order's not very good, but has something there, an atmosphere and world that's definitely worth a second try. Days Gone has its problems, but is ultimately a fun, solid time that no other game directly replicates. Knack is also there. Give me a second. I can fit it into my points somehow. No. Yes. No? Okay, no. Knack is proof that some things are just shit and shouldn't be given second chances because they're rubbish and I hate them. I'm not actually a person that likes sequels and franchises all the time. It's a bunch of shit that bleeds ideas dry to make more money. I like having a contained, meaningful piece of media, but if a sequel can add something, has a new point to make, then that's fine, sure. Doom wouldn't be what it is without Doom 2. Same with Silent Hill, Postal, The Witcher, Devil May Cry, not that one, even something like Call of Duty, but these all add their own ideas or spin what was previously a bit rough. Just making a sequel cause, sure, the last one was good, feels hollow and doesn't always achieve much. I'm sure the next Horizon game or whatever will be good, but it'll be more. It probably won't be new in the way you'd want it to be, and so, with that said, making the sequel this sort of reward to only the best is kind of dumb. And this is ignoring all the subjectivity to it. Go to the top 100 Metacritic games. Are they really your favourites of all time? Probably not, but also, we're mostly humans with individual tastes and preferences. Striving for the perfect piece is blind and only turns the medium into this samey blob where everything is objectively good and uses all the same functional mechanics. It's a bland corporate way of looking at an art form, which makes sense since I'm talking about a big bland corporation. But, I don't know, I'm not exactly writing a letter to Sony right now. Or am I? This is a very long email, Mr. Ryan, I'm sorry. I could have probably cut out all the video game review stuff. I guess I have an actual point this time though, which is nice. I usually just ramble for a bit, but there. I hope massive corporations who exist only to eat money be more appreciative of the art form they contribute to, and don't just see them as investments. It's a difficult thing to hope for, since it's kind of their point, but Okay, here's another point I guess. Don't just consume stuff. Sequels are nice, but look into other things rather than just constantly chasing what you've already experienced. People doing that is the reason that here, like, all whatever sucks nowadays, or the reason cinemas look like mini Disney worlds. Like, look into more random stuff that looks interesting. I don't care if you don't want to do it, just do it. Do it. But yeah, I guess that's everything I wanted to say. So, yeah. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, share. Share this with people in real life. Like, if you ever watching, like, meme videos with people or whatever, say, oh, there's this funny video, and put this on, and it's like more than an hour long, so they'll just be furious at you. This will be the last upload on this site, on YouTube entirely. This is it. We've done it, boys. We finished YouTube.
I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket, clinging to a chest till the last breath.